Stalin asked Kondratiev to tell him. So he was like an economist in Russia and
Mhm.
in the Soviet Union, and it was like, can you tell me when the capitalism, specifically like the U.S., when are they going to die, or when is it going to collapse? You know,
Mhm.
and so he went off and crunched his numbers and all that. And when he came back and said, I have, figured it out. And so Kondratiev said, well,
Welcome to the Think Profit Podcast. All information in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not financial or health advice.
Hey, Walter, I'd like to talk about some things that maybe a lot of traders aren't looking at, types of market data, maybe different indicators or something like that. What actually brought me to this idea was a few years back, I was invited to a broker out in Sweden. And I usually don't do that, but it sounded like fun and they just wanted to hang out. So I went out there and I met this guy who was on the board of the Foundation for the Study of Cycles, right? So I
yeah,
started looking into that stuff, and it was really interesting because the first of all, the founders of that association were pretty high level guys, in finance and industry and stuff like that. And I found that people like Larry Williams and what's that other guy, Jake Bernstein, they were on the board at the time also. And I've taken a look at Larry Williams' later video or more recent videos, and he's been talking about this thing about cycles and how he's figured out these cycles for different markets. So that really got me interested in that. And I also picked up, see Wells Wilder's book, The Delta Phenomenon,
right,
and he
right.
talks about cycles in that. Yeah, and that's primarily like moon phases, which is interesting. But I'm still backtesting that, so I don't know. I don't have anything
But
conclusive yet. But do you have any things that maybe you're looking at that I know people don't talk about very much online? I know you have that great work about like the net buyers and sellers across different brokers, right? But
oh,
are
yeah.
there things that you're looking at that might be interesting to people?
Um, well, I would just, if that's interesting to you, I would say just go look up Kondratiev. Like Kondratiev is the main guy. Like, so the story on that is that Stalin asked Kondratiev to tell him. So he was like an economist in Russia and
Mhm.
in the Soviet Union, and it was like, can you tell me when the capitalism, specifically like the U.S., when are they going to die, or when is it going to collapse? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so he went off and crunched his numbers and all that. And when he came back and said, I have, I've figured it out. And he said, okay, well, when are they going to, when is it going to die? And so Kondratiev said, well, essentially, if it's unfettered, like if it's not toyed with too much, like true capitalism, it's not going to die. It's going to have boom and bust cycles, but it's not really going to die per se. Um, but you could ruin it by like putting too many restrictions on it. And he said, the bad news though is that communism is going to die way long before capitalism will have. You know what I mean? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? He said, now capitalism with a fiat money will die with a what's called a crack up boom. And so a crack up boom is when everything goes up in price, but that's mostly because the money is worthless. So that's kind of the end result of capitalism. So he said that is true that capitalism will explode, but communism will die like there's not much holding up communism basically.
Mm-hmm.
But capitalism will die with a fiat. Now, if it has real money, so if it's unfettered and not too many restrictions placed on it, and it uses real money, it won't. And the reason for that, and you can actually go back and look at this in like the 1800s, things got cheaper when they used gold and silver, right? When you have
Mm-hmm.
real money, hard, like what's called hard money, and people would argue that Bitcoin is hard money or whatever, and that's fine. But the point is that, and it makes sense if you think about it. Like we're so used to having this 2-3% inflation every year, right? It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of built into us. But actually, if you look back, like let's say you're in the old west and you're making belts for cowboys. Well, what happens over time is you actually get more efficient at that. You start to get machinery that's better at making them, essentially you end up making them cheaper.
Hmm.
And it's very different to when you have fiat, when you basically have that built-in 2 to 3% loss of purchasing power every year. Although I would argue it's much more than that now, and that's part of the reason why the Fed's raising the interest rates and all that. But so yeah, so I personally I've looked into it. I think there is something there in terms of cycles, like like you're saying, moon. I did a test in 2004 Euro USD for moon cycles, and it seemed like on the new moon you would get these peaks on the Euro USD, things like that. And then what else? There's a lot of people that look at it, and they kind of, I think one of the really interesting approaches is if you have all these different cycles, like a long-term one and a medium term and a short term, and you kind of wait for them all to line up. It's kind of like those traders who have like 3 stochastics on their chart,
Hmm.
fast and medium, and they wait for them all to line up. It's kind of like that. Like I can see where that could be possibly useful. But to me, in a way, it's only really like that it's pointing out that there is a point in time when you should pay attention for a top and the bottom. It doesn't necessarily say where it's going to be. You know what I mean? So it's not magic in that sense, but it's kind of like I would use it as a tool of like, okay, this is the window where we should look and see, are we going to get a spike up here? And that may be, that's the sign that that's the end of this cycle or whatever. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's interesting. I would say if you're really into it, Kondrativ would be the guy to go, and we can put some links in the show notes for this episode. But that's what I would do.
Do you know what he was
Um,
basing his analysis on? Was it
no,
astrology or something like that?
no, 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 no. I don't think so at all. No, I think it was more. I think what he did, which is what a lot of people did back then, like even W.D. Gann,
Hmm.
um, they what they did is they went back and they looked at the old um the as best they could, the old the markets, the old charts and stuff, the old data. Probably
Hmm.
not charts, but more like data, and they tried to suss out what was happening. What were the sort of seasonal patterns or whatever, or annual, decade long patterns, things like that. Because the Kondrativ cycle is a really really long one. I think it's like 78. I mean, there's all kinds of Kondrativ indicators and stuff, but so it's like a years long thing. Some would argue that right now what we're seeing, especially in the US, is kind of this blow off top. It's like, why does the stock market keep make keep making these new highs when the underlying news like isn't necessarily good? You know what I mean?
It's
The
pretty
people are
bad,
like trying
actually.
to, yeah, it's pretty bad. Exactly. People are trying to figure out why do we keep making highs in the S&P 500, and yet like normally when that happens, like if you go back in the 70s or 60s or 80s or whatever, you go back and look and see when, what was the market like when it made a new high on the Dow or the S&P or whatever. And it's usually nothing like what we see today. So it's
Hmm.
very interesting that he had pointed this out so long ago. Oh, and I should mention for his service to the Soviet Union, he was sentenced to death. He didn't like it, right? I'm pretty sure it was Stalin.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Stalin, and Stalin said, that's not what I wanted to hear." And so that
Yeah.
was the end of it for him. But yeah, so yeah, I would say, I would start at Kondrativ and work your way from. I mean, I will say I've noticed the Larry Williams things. You mentioned Larry Williams. He has this like prediction that he puts out every year, or he used to every year on YouTube, where he would say this is where I think he would do like the Euro or the S&P or something, and he would say where it would go based on the
Hmm.
cycles. And I have to say I haven't found them to be particularly spot on, personally.
Hmm.
I found them to be
Yeah, yeah.
way off, but that's just what I've seen. And again, I haven't studied it a lot, so it's kind of one of those things that I haven't put a whole lot into. But there could definitely be something there. There's some traders that I respect that use them and rely on them. But again, I think it's kind of like that thing where it's like, okay, we're in this window right now, so now it could bottom or top here, and so this is why I need to pay attention. And you know what I mean? It's almost like an alert more than anything else. Like like
Yeah.
when price gets to a support resistance level, you might have an
Mhm.
alert. It sends you an alert on your phone or whatever. Okay, I got to go look at the chart. I kind of think of it in that way, but but that's just me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've been going through this, and that's exactly what he says. I mean, he says
Oh,
if I was if this was 100%, then I wouldn't be writing this book because I'd be making way too much money. But he says that, yeah, it's basically you're looking for, and every market is different. You're looking for a window of when the market is either going to continue in the same direction or it's going to reverse. And then so it's not an exact science, but it does give you like you said, a window of time where something could happen or is very likely to happen actually.
Right.
Do you know anything about this guy George Marichal?
How do you spell it? George Marshall? No.
M A
No, I
R
don't.
E C H A L.
Marechel.
A L.
Chal.
Yeah.
Nope. No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
No.
Well, I mean, he Wells Wilder talks about him as somebody who forecasted the Dow, and I mean his forecast was pretty close, but nobody knows like what his system was or how he came about that forecast, or it could have just been lucky or whatever, right? But I
Right.
thought that was interesting too.
You know what? I did see something on YouTube about this guy, and it was really interesting. They were trying to kind of piece it together. So
Mm,
that's all I know. There was one video I've seen like in the last year or year and a half, and yeah, and they were like, "Whoa, this guy's amazing," and they're really building him up, and they were showing exactly what he did. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, so I don't know anything beyond that about him because it's not
mhm.
a well known. He's not like a well known. Um,
No, he sounds like super obscure, and
yeah,
he just maybe had one
yeah.
good prediction. One of those guys, maybe. I don't know.
Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, hey,
Yeah.
I mean, the stuff that I'm pulling up right now is really interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to, I mean, those things are always cool to like. It's like you say though, if you don't like it, it's like kind of like GAN. Like, it's really cool to see someone that has this amazing hit rate or whatever. But at the end of the day, is it really useful for you to like spend your life trying to figure out what he did? You know what I mean? Because nobody
Yeah.
really knows. Like nobody really
Yeah.
knows. At the end of the day, you could just be the whole time you could just be trading a trend following strategy, which literally assumes you know nothing
Yeah.
about where the market's
Yeah.
headed and make money. You know what I mean? Like it's at
Yeah.
the end
Yeah.
like I've kind of come to that point where it's like, you know what I mean? Like it's like you have only so many hours. Do you really want to go down that path just for, you know what I mean? Like what's the
Yeah. Yeah.
return on that? Yeah.
What has, yeah, like you say, it has to be applicable. I mean, it has to be tradable, right? It has to be, you have
Yeah.
to be able to turn into some sort of strategy. Otherwise, it's really not worth pursuing.
Yeah. And people make that same argument about science. People will say that you should do no science unless you can directly see an application in life. And then
Hmm.
the other people, like the pure scientists, who say, no, we need to we need to figure out how the world works, and then later on we'll see how that what we've learned may apply to things in our lives and make our lives better or whatever. So there's a big argument on that, but for trading wise, I think traders are very pragmatic, and it's like, look, if this isn't going to help me do my job, what am I
Hmm.
doing here? What's the sort of
Yeah.
thing? And some people, that's not what you want. Like, Ed Sequoia, everyone gets what they want out of the markets. Some people don't want a tradable system. They like the puzzle of trying to figure it out. There's a lot of that going on too. Like, and I
Sure.
enjoy a lot of that, so that's part of being a trader. But some people, that is their number one motivation. It's not to trade and make money, is to actually figure it out, like, how does this work, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
Be the smartest guy in the room, basically, right?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you're looking at that is interesting or maybe a little weird?
um well, I find like the there are a lot of people on the fringe who talk about like sort of patterns. So it's kind of along the lines of what you're talking about. So I'm interested in people who will talk about, okay, this is what happened, back in 1912, and it's playing out now, or this is what happened in 1929, or this is what happened in 1845, and they're sort of making these parallels about, today versus back then, and so I do like that. I do like looking at that and seeing, oh, that's interesting. Like, because there's a lot of things I didn't know about pre post World War I Germany. There's a
Mm.
lot that I didn't know about, like before World War II, and there's a lot of things like that people are, pointing to parallels, or even like ancient Rome, which took a long, 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 long time to collapse. People pointing out, some of the parallels with Rome and like the U.S. and and even post World War I Germany and the U.S. and how this interesting things creep up. And so I like that. I like people trying to like map the past onto today. I don't think it necessarily works very well, but it's interesting to me
There's some
anyway.
clues
Yeah.
in there, I think, right? I've
Yeah.
studied some of like the Romanian inflation and yeah, and similar thing with the Weimar Republic and the hyperinflation and all that. So I think yeah, there's some clues in there, but you can't really like cut and paste the situation.
No, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But there are some. I agree, and that's part of the when I listen to these things, a lot of what I'm saying to myself is I don't know about that, but there are some really basic things like you see in Rome, they they empowered the so there was like this the women were felt like they were held down, and they empowered women, and then they empowered um like the fringes of society, so people who had like alternative lifestyles, right? And they did
Hmm.
the same thing in Berlin pre Adolf, right? Pre Adolf, they did the same thing in Berlin. They had these huge shows where like it was like really what you would call like fringe things, and they were like lifted those up. And then there were a lot of um like there were a lot of there's a lot of splitting of society, you know what I mean, along really fine lines. And
Hmm.
so, and these become really important. It's just really interesting seeing that back then, in Germany, in Rome, and then looking at what's going on in the US at the moment. To me, there are some real interesting parallels there. And I'm not suggesting that they're manufactured. I'm just suggesting that it's interesting that these things rhyme. You know what I mean? How they say like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. It's just really
Yeah.
interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we have a friend from Romania, and she said, yeah, what's going on here is very similar to what happened back then. So she sees a lot of parallels there too.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Like you have certain
Hmm.
people from certain countries, like like in the southern border of the US, a lot of people will come in, but
Hmm.
they don't necessarily like people coming in from Venezuela. I wonder why that would be. I wonder why that would be, right? Wonder
Yeah.
why they don't like them, why they don't like those Venezuelans coming in, They can come from any other country, but when it comes to Venezuela, they're not open arms, because they have very
Yeah.
different perspective than a lot of the people coming that are escaping from Venezuela, from other countries. So it's interesting. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Walter.
Thank you.